How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I've got a very special guest for you all. Today, I'm joined by a coach, a researcher, a writer. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Tony Montgomery. How are you doing?
Doing good, man. I appreciate the kind words to the introduction. The one and only is a little much, but I appreciate it.
No worries. But yeah, how are you? What's kind of been happening in your world recently?
Yeah, things are going good. The semester started back up, so just kind of getting in the flow of getting the research projects up and running, getting the papers submitted to different journals and stuff like that. So just trying to get back in the routine and be as productive as possible.
Nice, cool. And how does that kind of it's like semesters sort of like change? How much is that kind of like teaching compared to practical, and how does that kind of work within your role?
Yeah, so right now, I'm only working on my dissertation, so I'm not taking any other courses at this time. I was gonna try to take one, but it got, I'm not in the psych department, so when you try to take psych department courses, you don't get necessarily put on the top of the list. So I got kicked out of a course that I wanted to take, but yeah, so just doing dissertation hours, and I do teach a course as well throughout the semester. The course is on sh- kind of the way I frame it is it's on leadership principles and communication as a coach. But the title of the course is Coaching Professional Development and Theory and Practice. So that's what I teach to the undergrads. And then everything else is just strictly research. We have a couple different research projects going on right now. One's a qualitative research interview process, working with veterans and trying to figure out why therapy has been successful for some and why some it's still stigmatized. So just trying to interview as many veterans as possible for that research project. And then the other one we have going on is more of a quantitative one. So we're looking at different interventions we can do to improve people's adherence and motivation to exercise. And this next one we have is focusing on sedentary population. So trying to figure out ways to make exercise more enjoyable, make them more motivated to want to continue on, and then we'll do follow-ups to see if they're able to adhere to any type of exercise regime afterwards. So that's kind of what we're working on right now as a group.
Oh, cool. And how have you with all that going on? How's your own training going? Have you got time to fit that in and get some time away from the academic side of things, if you like?
Yeah, of course, of course. Like one of the things I promised myself through years of being an entrepreneur is just always making sure that like you set a time limit to where this is work time and then this is play time. So going into the PhD, it was no different. Like I made sure that if I can't get the work done from 9 to 5, then I either have to work on becoming more productive within that time frame, or I'm overreaching and I'm not able. I need to pull back more. So definitely training. I don't power lift or do strongman anymore. It's mostly focused on endurance races. So I do have a 100-mile trail run coming up in October that I'm training for. So that's kind of the goal right now.
Cool. I started sweating just thinking about their 100
Yeah.
100 mile run and that. Interestingly, there's a guy that I used to work with. A little bit of a tangent on this, but he used to train with me doing powerlifting and strongman. And we got talking about, or he got talking about wanting to do a marathon, and he was thinking,
Mhm.
well, I'm never going to get a good. He's slightly taller than me, was always slightly like broader than me, but he was like, I might not be able to run the fastest marathon, but I wonder how many he could do. So is it a backyard ultra or a backyard
They,
marathon?
they do
Yeah.
have backyard ultras, yeah.
Yeah,
Super
so
brutal.
that's his thing now. So I think it's just because I like to joke, just because he's stubborn. He just won't stop. He won't stop moving and keep doing it. So cool. For the introduction, I did quite a brief introduction there, But for everyone listening who might not know your background in, education, training, coaching, to be kind of like where you are at the minute, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So I always like to start off with the knowledge that I was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps during 2004 to 2008, did one combat tour. And I always say that because it kind of shapes who I am as a person. It played a big role. So even though it's not an athletic endeavor, it's something that made me the man I am today. So I always incorporate that in. But once I got out of the military, I started going to school at Florida Atlantic University for exercise science. And during that process, I always had this idea that I wanted to start my own gym and facilitate that. So during the time I was getting my bachelor's in exercise science, I also started a garage gym and turned it into a 5,000 square foot kind of warehouse gym where we focus mostly on sports performance as far as coaching goes. And we did a lot of boot camps as well to make money because sports performance doesn't necessarily pay the most amount right away. So we had to get those people in shape. And during that time, I also competed in powerlifting and strongman. So the gym had a ton of that equipment. And I did strongman first. Always wanted to kind of stay competitive. That's just kind of in my nature. So I did strongman and made it. I was a 231 competitor and made it to a pro am and got third at a pro am. So not quite a pro card, but definitely was able to push that a little bit. And then I got into powerlifting, and with powerlifting, I, I decided that I kind of wanted to like shape my own education within powerlifting. So I sold the gym that I had in Florida, moved to Colorado, trained there for a little bit, started an online business where I help people with training and nutrition and stuff like that. And then decided to really take powerlifting to like the next level and learn. So I moved to California and trained with Dan Green and Boss Barbell Club for a handful of years, and then moved up north and trained with Jesse Burdick and got to train with Mark Bell every now and then and that crew, Jeremy Avila. And then moved to Portland, Oregon, where I started training with Chris Duffin and my training partner, Sean Doyle. If you guys remember him, he was one of the people that competed in the big dogs competitions and total 2400. So it was always a pleasure to feel small and inadequate next to him and training with him. But I always took that as an opportunity to learn and pick their brain, and that was kind of my education, even though I wasn't in school. From a powerlifting standpoint, I totaled 2,000 over 2,000 twice at 242 in reps. So I did I think it was like a 772 squat, 522 bench, and like a 712, 720 deadlift, something around that. And then when I was living in Portland, I fell in love with like nature and going hiking, and that kind of interfered with powerlifting a little bit.
Not many
So
trees in
that's
the gym.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And walking's bad for squat days. Um, and before I or when I got out of the military too, I also did some MMA for a little bit. So I was always intrigued by MMA. So I started doing jujitsu, and I trained and competed in jujitsu for 7 years and really enjoyed that process. But along the way in Portland, I started another gym and I started a supplement company. And although those things were great, it brought a lot of people into my life. It wasn't as fulfilling an endeavor as I thought it was going to be. So I thought maybe, on the weekends, I was always like, man, I can't wait for the weekends to come. I can read some research. I can like learn some more. And I was like, oh, like you can go to school and get paid for that too. So I was like, I guess I'll try that. So I joined the University of South Florida and did my master's degree out there with Sam Buckner and Dr. Bill Campbell and learned a lot from them, especially Sam. He's one of those professors that does a very good job of challenging the status quo and looking at things from a very contrarian lens. So it definitely challenged a lot of my fundamental beliefs about training and made me like open up my thought process to learn and try to take in as much as possible. And then I recently, the last 2.5 years, so I'm in my third year as a PhD student at Oklahoma State. That's where I'm at now in Stillwater, Oklahoma, focusing on um, trying to find interventions, both on the psychological side and also on the exercise side to implement to improve mood and motivation and exercise adherence in people that suffer from mental health disorders. So that's kind of the whole premise of what my research is on now and what I'm looking forward to do in the years to come.
Ah, cool. And I suppose that that's quite a a varied background, a little bit of a who's who list of who you've trained with as well, which is cool to hear. But the one thing that you mentioned quite a lot there was wanting to learn, whether that be from training with other people, reading research, conducting research. Has that kind of always been a pursuit of yours, if you like, wanting to just, learn and take on that information?
Yeah, it wasn't until I joined the military until I got super interested. Like in high school, you had more, you had a higher probability of seeing me outside of school than actually in the classroom. I went to school to play football, and that was kind of it. I thought that that would be like what my bread and butter was. So then when I graduated and I didn't have any scholarships or anything like that, I was like, man, I don't really know what to do with my life. So the military was a great outlet to provide that discipline, and I got lucky enough to work with the Special Forces unit in the Marines. So I got to see a lot of the highest performers in action, and I always thought it was amazing to understand their mental fortitude and then also their physical prowess. So I think being in that group and in that environment, I was always trying to get better myself so that I can keep up with them and learn from them. So that kind of sparked a lot of the interest in trying to learn as much as I could about strength and conditioning, as much as I could about the psychological components of what makes mentally tough, resilient people. And that I started reading and I just never stopped after that. I just fell in love with it. So I think I got lucky by finding something that I was super interested in and that captivated me and that I was able to kind of put some real like tangible real world things in place to make it sink in as well. I was like, man, this is beneficial because I can already see the fruits of the labor. And I think if maybe I went in a different direction and it wasn't as applicable right away, maybe it would have deterred me. But I think having that practicality of like I can start reading this and translating it into how my body improves, how my mind improves, was something that I just fell in love with.
Yeah. And I can imagine, seeing, elite. I want to use the word performers. They're maybe not performers, but people at the elite level of what they do. I can imagine that is inspiring and being, look, you want to try and replicate that or work towards that. I can only kind of relate it to myself in powerlifting. I remember I went to my first nationals, and it was I was actually warming up on the same squat rack as Tony Cliff, and yeah, at the time I was like in awe of just how he conducted himself, and then from there, being a lot younger at my first nationals, I was in my kit straight away and I was like trying to rush, whereas he just seemed a little bit like what we spoke before about managing your time if you can't get it in between 9 and 5. He seemed like in control of the situation. I mean, I'm sure maybe is it like the swan analogy where his like feet are swimming underneath, but he looks
Yeah,
calm,
yeah.
calm on top. That might be the case, but yeah, I think sometimes, and I like to ask that question because it's interesting to see how other people are inspired to learn more or do more. Um, the topics that I sent over, and that kind of goes quite well into topics that I had in mind, kind of from like the coaches side, but also the client athlete side of things. And the first question, if you like, and you mentioned there about the psychology of getting better, the motivation, and I suppose the first question is from a coach's point of view, how far can you support a client, an athlete, just by having an understanding of training? And at what point is it a case of actually I need to support this client, this athlete in terms of, mindset, in terms of, adjusting maybe how I communicate, how I motivate them, how I push them. Is there like a breaking point, or are those psychology softer skills? Um, do you need that? Do you need that first with a client or athlete, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, and it really depends on who you're working with, right? Like if you're working with, I think the way we look at it from a therapeutic standpoint is you're trying to build that therapeutic alliance of trust and buy-in. So I think that that's always important, right? I think it's important to always understand why the people you're working with, why they do the things that they do, and what makes them tick. So I always think that that should be at the forefront of um, some of the interaction that you have with them. Obviously, if you're working with professional athletes that get paid for a living, maybe they don't need as much motivation to get into the gym. So you don't need to worry about that as much. Maybe it could be focusing on the stress and the day-to-day interactions that they have in life. But when you're working with powerlifters or strength athletes, I think the training component is important to understand the fundamentals of how to get someone strong, but I don't think it's that complicated. Like it's not where you're thinking about different energy systems, you're thinking about speed, potentiation, velocity, agility. Like you're just trying to get them as strong as humanly possible, right? So I think once you get those basic fundamentals, the ability to understand um, stress and the way I look at it is like allostatic load, right? The stress environments that they interact with, it's like a bucket. And a good analogy is the idea that whenever you have stressful events happening in your life, you start to empty that bucket. And then the recovery stuff, the psychological stuff, sleep, nutrition, proper programming, that's when you start to put those things back in that bucket, right? So I think once you have those fundamental things under control, then yeah, the next step is to make sure psychologically that you're able to check in with your athletes, that you're able to understand what they're going through, that you're able to create this alliance with them that where they feel no matter what I say, this person has my back and they want what's best for me. So then I feel comfortable to tell them everything I have going on in my life. And I think once I realized that, I was able to get a lot more information from my clients. There's a lot of times where clients, if they don't feel comfortable telling you the things that they have going on in their life because of fear that you're going to reduce their training load or fear that they're not going to be able to handle things, they're not. Athletes are always going to tell you we're 100% ready to go. So
Yeah.
you have to learn to read between the lines of like, is this true? Is this not true? Why is it not true? Why are they not telling me? What kind of environment did I create to where they don't feel comfortable telling me what's going on, and how can I facilitate that? So I think in order for you to get the best out of a client, they have to believe in you, trust you, and they have to be able to understand that like the conversations you guys have, the check-ins, those things are the most important things. Those far outweigh the X's and O's because those determine what those X's and O's are. So I think having a fundamental idea of like stress, the role that it plays, what people are going through, and then how to motivate them, whether it be through goal setting, extrinsic, intrinsic, knowing their personality, what kind of makes them tick, how can you talk to them, right? Everyone's going to be different. You're going to have to interact with everyone from a different perspective based off of past experiences, based off of their current surrounding environment, based off of what they have in the toolbox as far as psychological interventions, whether they can understand cognitive reappraisal, emotion regulation, those type of things. So I think as a coach, you can write a 12-week program, but if you're not able to understand some of those emotional regulation strategies to help them overcome the day-to-day stresses of life, then you're never going to get the most out of their potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that as well, so you've mentioned there about, creating that environment of um the client athlete being able to feel comfortable and maybe safe saying, actually, I'm not 100%, or this has happened, or this has happened. from your experience, how did you kind of go about breaking those barriers down? Because sometimes there can be a train of thought of um, well, I'm the coach, so this is the plan anyway. We're just going to go through that. Whereas I suppose the second question as well is how did you find kind of like adapting from being, that person that's giving that motivation to maybe that person who's being maybe a little bit more, I don't know if a sympathetic is the right word, but a little bit more, listening to what they're saying because there's that phrase, isn't there, that like a coach is your best friend, your taskmaster. There's a lot of hats that you can wear. What was your kind of approach to that to break those barriers down, to increase that communication, to tap into your clients and athletes' mindset?
Yeah, I think understanding um, the ability to put yourself in other people's shoes is very helpful, having that empathic attunement. But also the idea of, you know, asking yourself the simple questions of if I was a coach, what are some things that I would want my coach to know about me, to ask me, to get to know me? What would make me love my coach and believe in my coach and follow my coach. And those are some of the things that, you have to do. It's like, it's very simple things too. It's like showing that you care, you know, going to maybe their social media page and seeing that they have a significant other. And then every now and then asking about the significant other, right? Asking what they have going on in their life outside of training, asking them, depending on how you check in, right? I think there's a good idea of developing good questions to kind of start to elicit responses, and then reading through those responses allows you to get the whole perspective, right? Because like if you are working with somebody from a one-on-one perspective, that's not an online coach, I think the first 10 minutes of every interaction is a great way to start building these ideas of what this person's going through, how they are, what they can handle. As a coach, when I was working with athletes, I always made a workout and a B workout. And if they came in and they're usually pretty high energy and they kind of were dragging their feet, and then we went through the warm up and you start asking them questions like, hey, how's your sleep going? How are you and your girlfriend doing? And then you find out like, oh, we got in a fight last night. My sleep's a little disturbed. Then we go like, okay, well, let's do plan B. And then you explain to them why you're going through these processes. I think one of the biggest things you have to overcome as a coach is the athletes are being told by coaches and researchers day in and day out that like more volume, you got to train harder, you got to do all these things. So if they have this thought process of, the only way I'm going to get better is if I do more and more and more. And if I tell my coach the truth, then they're going to take stuff away from me. So then I'm not going to get better. So as a coach, one of the things was being able to relay to them the information of like, hey, like you're stressed out right now, and your body only recognizes stress. It's a response. It's an emotional response that releases cortisol, that releases all your hormones, all these neurotransmitters, right? And then if you exercise, that's also a stress. So we can't really control the life stresses that are going on right now. So we can only focus on controlling the things that we can control. And we can control sleep, we can control nutrition, and we can control your programming. So you explain to them, we're going to reduce volume so that your stress load gets reduced so that you're able to recover from your workout. And by being able to recover from your workout, you're going to get stronger. But if you're constantly inundating yourself with more volume and you can't recover from it, the research clearly shows that if you're not able to recover from your workout, you're not going to get the training adaptations. But nobody talks about that. Everyone talks about like we got to increase volume all the time. And it's like, no, you got to recover from the volume. That's the most important thing, right? So if you explain to them, the more honesty you have with me, the more we can dial in your ability to recover from the training sessions, then the more we can actually individualize these training sessions to fit your needs and the demands that you have to go through to get better. But if you're not able to recover both emotionally and physically, then your training adaptations are going to take a back seat. So I think part of that process is one, um, get to know them, get to know what they care about in their life. Is their dog their best friend? Are they best friends? Do they spend time with their mom on the weekend? And then check in on those things. Oh, how's your dog? How's your mom doing? How's this? How's that? You have a business? Oh, great. How's the business going? Is there anything I can help you with your business? Like, can I provide some insight on how to develop, like, can I do anything to take stress away from your life?
Yeah.
And then we also know within the research that social interaction, that ability to care, that ability to get them to open up has positive impacts on your central nervous system. As human beings, we regulate our nervous systems based on the people we interact with. So if we're interacting with people that are very short, cold, cut off, we're going to start to regulate our nervous system as thinking of that as uncertainty and unpredictability. So if that person is short, then you're going to start thinking like, what are they keeping from me? Like, what's going on with them? And then your body starts to think, this is a fear response. This is a sympathetic response. So now I'm going to shut down because they're shutting down, right? And that's very specific to Western culture. The interesting thing with like Eastern culture, suppression of emotion, suppression of thoughts doesn't have a negative consequence on their central nervous system because in their climate and their dynamic, the idea is that individually you're supposed to handle your emotions and you don't want to give your emotional stress to the collective unit because we don't want to disrupt the collective unit. So by suppressing that, they actually get no negative central nervous system responses. But in America, we're very much individualistic society. So when we suppress our emotions, automatically we're thinking, oh man, what is this? This person doesn't like me. This person doesn't do this. So then we start to have that sympathetic response, that fear response. So that's the first thing is trying to show that you care by digging into, you don't even have to be a therapist at this point. You just have to understand human needs of people want to be heard, people want to be seen. How can you provide that for them? And then the other aspect is, yeah, your ability to understand from a biopsychosocial model. So you have the biological side of stress, you have the social model of stress, and you have the physiological or psychological side of stress. And how do all those components play a role in that person's life? And then kind of continue to reform your questions and your check-ins to be able to pull those things apart so that you're able to individually make those adjustments in your program
Yeah.
and
And
explain to them, give them that idea of like, hey, this is where we're at, this is where we're going, this is how we're getting there, so that they fully know that, hey, this person's invested in me for 12, I'm only paying them for a month, but they're thinking 16 weeks ahead.
yeah,
So they're already thinking what's best for me. And now I have a game plan, I have a map. So that's one less stressful thing I have to worry about because this person's already taking care of it and they're expressing that to me as well.
yeah. I think from there, all the things that you've mentioned. I think the last part, which kind of tapped into my kind of mindset around thing is working as a team. Like you're both kind
Mhm.
of in it together, and you're both working towards this, end goal, whatever that might be. And when you were saying there, asking them, taking an interest in what they're actually doing. I can't remember the phrase, but something people don't know how much you care, or how much you know until how much you care. I can't
Mhm.
remember that. I can't remember the full phrase. But from there, that would sound as though you're just having a conversation with another human, taking interest in. If we were to meet in person, I'd be like, "Oh, Tony? How's the PhD going?" You have a conversation with that person. The softer skills of coaching, having that invested interest, getting to know, build rapport with your client and athlete, is that sometimes where do you think it gets missed a little bit and people get caught up in being this coach of I just need to know this, this, and this and try and have more kind of solid numbers or scores rather than, focusing on on that rapport building. They kind of get caught up in the coach side of things rather than maybe the human element kind of things, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean it makes a lot of sense. I think you're right to some degree where we read research and we allow research to be one of these guiding principles of how we create exercise programs. And then when we do that, we start to take away the humanistic element of individual programming. This idea that this is the model of programming because this is what the research says to get the most optimal results. So we focus on what's the most optimal program. But then the research also shows that if you allow the person to pick the first exercise, that they're going to have a improved mood and an improved affect towards exercise. They're going to be more likely to be motivated to come back in to exercise. So developing a program that the person actually enjoys fundamentally is the most important thing. And I think without thinking of people as these robots where you can just put in these Excel sheets to get them to elicit these training adaptations, right? Like there's more to it than that. We have to think of it from um, an approach to where one, we're giving the athletes tools that they can help regulate their stress on their own. I think that's a really important thing. We don't want to one of the things in therapy that you don't want to do is you don't want to create an environment where they feel like you are the only one that can give them answers and you're the only one that has answers. So then you start to take away some of that self-efficacy from them. So you want to make sure that you're providing tools that they can do on their own. But yeah, I think one of the main principles that people have an opportunity to improve on is the understanding that uh, yes, the research is a good guiding principle to develop the fundamentals, but there's so much interindividuality within the research that we tend to miss the forest through the trees sometimes, right? Like if you look at the research, you'll see that there are some people, the average shows great response, but there's a lot of outliers that didn't respond, that had negative results, that were physiological, like unbelievable results. And then you have to understand the limitations of research as well. The fact that a lot of people build their careers and their ability to have viable success based off of getting things into research journals. And research journals don't like to take null results. So, there's a little bit of bias that goes into that where people maybe not consciously, but unconsciously want their results to look a certain way. So, maybe with the ultrasound, they're a little bit less, as nuanced. They're a little bit more finicky with it, right? And I think that's some of the stuff that Dr. Buckner talks about a lot is this idea of, how replicable is it? How realistic is it? But yeah, getting back to your original point is that you do have to understand that each individual is going to have certain needs, certain dynamics. There's certain recovery modalities that benefit females over males, right? So, like, say you want to get a training adaptation out of a person and you're training their aerobic system, or you want to build up metabolites to get some type of hypertrophic response. And you give somebody a program and you tell them you're going to rest 90 seconds. And then you give a female the same program, you tell them to rest 90 seconds. We know through the literature that females are more fatigue resistant. They do a far better job of circulating oxygen and delivery and getting rid of lactate, getting rid of hydrogen, getting rid of inorganic phosphate that cause that metabolite buildup. So their rest period needs to be shorter. Maybe it's 30 seconds to get the same training adaptation. So even just within that small dynamic of like interindividuality, you have to think of people as that, both physically and then psychologically as well, right? Understanding that each person has a past history of how that makes them perceived and predict the world, and you have to understand that their prediction paradigm, their perception of stress, their perception of how they can handle things is going to correlate to their ability to adapt to the training program. So sure, you can get people strong by doing the fundamental stuff, but I think there's more to being a coach than just getting people strong. I think the other part of being a coach is um, creating good people and good humans and making sure that they're resilient and that they know that you care and that they can handle things on their own. So one of the things that I focus on a lot is trying to provide as many tools as possible so that they don't feel beholden to me as being the only one that can give them answers. You give them mastery and self-efficacy over their own bodies and their own minds, then they're going to leave and be perfectly fine on their own. And I think as a coach, that should be the goal is like I want to impart my knowledge. I want to impart my wisdom. I want to guide you, but I also want you to be comfortable stepping away and being successful on your own. So I do think a lot of coaches have maybe a little bit more of a scarcity mindset of, you know, I need to pay my bills.
Yeah,
So maybe I don't give them all the information they need to where they feel like they can do it on their own. Maybe I hold back a little bit and I think that's a problem with some of the exercise coaching and things that I see is that there is this scarcity mindset of like if I do teach them to fish as opposed to feed them the fish, then they're going to leave. And then
yeah,
what am I going to do with my next client? How am I going to pay my bills? Like that's always in the back of our mind, whether it's conscious or unconscious.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that sometimes maybe a little bit of a tangent on there, where sometimes it's a little bit of a disservice to the client or athlete, holding things back, which ultimately, if they had um, uh, if they didn't have that doubt of, oh well, I better double check what this is. Which don't get me wrong, sometimes that double checking I think is always good, but uh, there's a change in word where a little bit like what I mentioned earlier about working as a team rather than like double checking. It's like this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Well, I think the same. I think that will be a good choice. After a certain point, I think when first working with clients and athletes, you've got to build up that rapport, and it might be a little bit more coach led, but the more rapport that you build, it then becomes more of a conversation in terms of like what direction they're going, because then you can tap into what the responses are like. Are they excited about this thing? Are they a little bit unsure? Are they which I think is important.
Yeah.
One thing on that, and you kind of mentioned there of, making them more resilient, robust, having that stronger mindset, and ultimately getting results. And one thing, and I've listened to quite a lot of things about this. I know obviously you spoke with Paul O'Neill about doing difficult things, and what I kind of wanted to touch on is from the client's point of view, or maybe the coach's point of view as well. How does that impact on showing being knowing that your coach cares and is invested in your progress? How does that impact on them? Um, Getting out of their comfort zone, wanting, willing to do those difficult things because, sometimes in any progress to get better, you need to um, push those boundaries a little bit more. I would maybe say, and sometimes do things that are going to be challenging, that aren't going to be easy. How does tapping into that mindset, having a good understanding of their psychology, allow them to do those difficult things, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. So the idea of building resiliency through difficult things, that's one way to build resiliency, right? But another way of building resiliency is through your ability to regulate your emotions as well. So I think those are two different components when you look at the stress resiliency literature that shows efficacy in trying to develop that. The first one, the idea is that by one doing things that are difficult, and that means things that are difficult and also things that you do not enjoy, right? So it's one thing to tell a power lifter like, hey, we're gonna go from squatting singles to get you ready to a meet to now we're gonna do a little bit more volume and you're gonna do like sets of 6 to 8. And to them that's challenging, right? Because you detrained your body. So it is going to be challenging. You haven't trained your cardiovascular system because who needs to have a cardiovascular system when you're doing a 1 rep max, right? Um, but they enjoy that. That's still enjoyable to them because it is part of that lifting dynamic. So I think the idea of doing challenging things, we want to think about it in terms of is it things that we also don't enjoy doing, but that we know are going to benefit us in some capacity? And I think that that's where that resilience piece comes in. And some of the research on that to kind of back that up is we do see areas of increased hypertrophy in brain areas that are beholden to motivation, like the anterior mid cingulate cortex, that's been shown to be something that is larger in the people that live longer in life, the centurions. It's been shown to be bigger in people that push and do challenging things. So those two correlations of the idea, and it is correlational data, so always keep that in mind. There's no causation there, but the idea that this brain area is bigger in people that live longer. So therefore, there must be some type of efficacy in doing things that enlarge this brain area. And the things that seem to enlarge this brain area are things that are challenging, but that are also think of it as like a beginner skill level. So you're challenging yourself to learn something new, and it's extremely difficult. So if you are a power lifter, maybe that comes in the form of learning a different language that you've never learned before. You're both very bad at it because you didn't develop that linguistic capabilities as a youth. And it's also very challenging. It requires a lot of time, it requires a lot of effort. So that's something completely unrelated to your ability to be a power lifter, but that can build up those brain areas because it is very, very difficult to learn and to do. So I think if you're constantly chasing this idea of doing hard things, then you also have to ask yourself, is it actually beneficial to my training? So
Yeah.
if I tell a power lifter like, hey, this weekend we're gonna build some mental resilience. I want you to go do a 30-mile trail run. You're like, it's going to take them 6 weeks to recover from that. Like that's not going to be beneficial from their training point of view. But if you challenge them and you tell them, hey, like what's something you've always wanted to do that you just were scared to do? And they're like, I don't know, public speaking. And you're like, well, I challenge you during this 12-week meet prep that we're going to try to apply to do some type of public speaking, and we're going to challenge you in that dynamic, right? And that's going to allow them to, one, learn the benefits of doing hard things that they're scared to do, and understand that they're capable of doing more than they can. I think if you're thinking about building stress resiliency, that's actually adaptive to an athlete to be able to train and get better. I think that's where the psychological components of emotion regulation to build stress resiliency come into play. And the research, Dr. Kalish, I think is how you say his name, just did a very good, it's like a 50-page critical review on stress resiliency mechanisms in people. And they go into the neurobiological side of stress resiliency, and then they go into the intervention-based side to improve stress resiliency. And what they found was your ability to shift your perceptions, your ability to reappraise negative stimuli into positive stimuli, are two of the most fundamental basic components of building stress resiliency. And some of the research backs that up as well. We have research by Aaliyah Crum, who's done really good research on the ability to change your perception of things and how that is adaptive in nature. So one of the studies she did was took a group of people and taught them that stress was a good thing, and to look at stress as a positive thing, almost as in a sense of, I see this stressful situation. What can I learn from it? What can I glean from it? How can I lean into the challenge? Versus the other group, they taught them that, stress is, and neither group was lied to. They taught them that stress was this negative response towards emotional uncertainty or regulation. And they found that the group that was able to change their perception of stress to a positive thing saw benefits in their blood pressure, saw benefits in their rest and all these other like physiological markers just by changing their perception. And then you have really good research on emotion regulation and your ability to reappraise stressful events. And that's something that we just did within our research as well, where we were taking people through time to exhaustion trials on a bike. And one group got regular motivation. They were just, told, hey, keep pushing, you're doing great, just keep working. And the other group, we taught them how to reappraise negative stimuli. So things that if boredom comes up and you're just because everyone gets bored on a stationary bike, it's not a pleasant experience, right? So when that comes up, I want you to reframe boredom as a challenge. How long can I endure? How long can I push through this boredom and then pain or getting out of breath? I want you to reframe that as this is not a negative thing. This is not your body hurting. This is your body adapting. And the more I can push into that, the more positive adaptations I'm going to get both physically and mentally. And what we found was the group that was taught cognitive reappraisal not only improved significantly their time to exhaustion trials, but also in 6 week follow-ups, they improved their positive mood profiles, which was a questionnaire we asked them. So they had a more positive affect in their life as well because we taught them the strategies of how to use cognitive reappraisal in everyday life as well. So I think being able to teach them these strategies of how to use these things in everyday life is going to allow them to build stress resiliency outside of the concept of doing hard things because there is tons of benefits of doing physically hard things, but that's not always going to translate to better adaptations to get you ready for the platform and get you ready for a competition. So you always have to think about when is it appropriate, when is it not appropriate. And I think if you understand both of those dynamics, you can kind of pick and choose when you want to put them in. And we see that with like strength coaches that work with football players. They do these conditioning drills that are just the most asinine things on the planet. And you're like, that's not going to make them a better athlete. But what it does, and what the research tells us it does, is that it builds camaraderie. The more you can suffer together, the more you can build that relationship of past experiences, the more you're going to fight, the more you're going to be responsible, the more you're going to do your job with the people. And it also teaches them that when times get tough in the regular season, think back about these extras, like these conditioning days where we were moving for an hour. It's never going to be as tough as that. So they do that deep into the off season, and that's beneficial. So maybe in the off season when you're working with powerlifters or strength athletes, doing some really hard conditioning and then being able to reiterate that when it's time for prep and you can tell them, hey, remember when we did don't do this. But remember when we did 100 prowler pushes and they're like, yeah, that was the worst day of my life. And then you're like, yeah, how does prep compare to that? And they're like, oh yeah, it's not nearly as bad. Like you want me to do three singles? Like that's nothing compared to 100 prowler pushes, right? So I think the benefit of doing those hard physical things is great in the aspect of you can change their perception towards what hard is and what they're capable of, as opposed to thinking like it's great for training. It's not like
Yeah.
those, the first 100 mile race I did, I had leg like edema for 14 days and I couldn't like I was the most sore I've ever been. So hard things is not good for training because you have to recover from those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, being able to pick and choose and have an understanding of like why is it important to do this now? And then also regulating the rest of the volume for, you're going to wreck them on a Saturday. You better pull back their volume next week. Maybe they're going into a deload or maybe they go into so yeah, you have to understand the dynamics of why they can be beneficial, what they require from a recovery standpoint, and then when it's appropriate to implement them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think from there, some really good points in that is like what you've said there of, or what was going around in my head is that it's a tool that can be used as long as like you understand how to use that tool, and there's a benefit at the end. I think, and why I wanted to cover that is that sometimes, there's I can't remember again what I was listening to, but if you put something in front of a program, like Spartan or really hard or anything like that, people all of a sudden want to do it because they see it as a challenge. But then sometimes, the understanding or the maybe the value of doing difficult things with actual, benefit gets lost because it's a case of do this really hard thing, and that's going to get you benefit, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but um, it's that thing of using the right tools at the right time, and that's kind of tied in nicely with what we've spoken about of you mentioned earlier about explaining why is it that we're doing this, getting to know them. This is going to be the best way that I think for you is this is going to be the best thing to do it. I think as a coach recommending, right, we're going to do this thing. which is then going to allow you to be more resilient and thinking probably bigger picture rather than just hammering that one difficult thing or that one hard thing. So yeah, I think that all kind of ties in with working as a coach and getting results with clients. We spoke about quite a lot there and had a couple of tangents and topics covered, but the last question that I like to ask
Hold
Tony
on,
from,
one Stephen,
sorry, go
one
on.
one thing real
Yeah.
fast, if you don't mind. You brought up an idea of also understanding your clients and their susceptibility to anxiety, depression, neuroticism, things like that. So yeah, you could present this Spartan 12-week, let's train our eyes out training program. And if you're working with someone that has high anxiety, that's going to destroy them. They're
Mm,
not going to want to work with you. They're not. So you do have to understand that there are mental health components of working with people, such as anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, things that require a fundamental understanding of this is the personality type that they have. What can I do as a coach to introduce these hard things, but not also scare them away as
yeah.
well? Because I found that a lot of people choose powerlifting because it is a great community-based sport, but it's also not as look at me, I'm out there in the stratosphere. So a lot of people that I've worked with have levels of anxiety and depression that's very common in the powerlifting community. So I think understanding that, like, if you're this over the top alpha male coach that's going to push them to do this hard 12-week pro, like that's going to destroy people. And as a coach, that's the worst thing you can do is to not understand your client and give them a program that makes them hate what they used to love doing. So I'm glad that you mentioned that because it made it more salient in my mind, this idea that you got to understand people are going through a lot with mental health, and part of our job as a coach is to they're hiring you because they love what they do and they want to be good at it. And as a coach, we have an opportunity to improve that, but we also have an opportunity to destroy that and cause burnout. And we have to be very cognizant of that. And we also have to understand that it's a privilege. They hired us. So every day we have to show up to prove to them that we deserve to be their coach, not to prove to them that, we are the most knowledgeable coach or we're the most badass coach or we're the most like you got to put your ego aside to work with your athletes. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think, there's my mindset has always been, I want clients, athletes that I work with to work hard, but not at the expense of being able to function as a human, enjoy what they do. A little bit, that's why I asked at the start, how are you getting on with your own training? Because everyone gets involved in training because they enjoy it. That's how everyone gets involved with it. Or, they see like me, in the UK, World's Strongest Man is always on around Christmas. So growing up as a kid, it's like, oh yeah, cool. You want to be like that. Like what you mentioned, about the special forces. You look up to people and you want to try and replicate that by giving that a go. And that's probably the same for that client or athlete. Um, yeah, the last question that I like to ask, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit there, but for everyone listening, what would be your take home points or words of wisdom from everything that we've spoken about today, Tony?
Yeah, I think if you want to be a successful coach, you should really ask yourself, do I actually care about the clients that I work with? And if the answer is yes, then how can I improve and show them that I care? And I think if you ask yourself those two questions, you're going to become a significantly better coach in every aspect of being a coach. So I think that would be the biggest take home. And if the answer is no, then find another profession. Like maybe it's not for you. It's not for everyone. Right?
Yeah. I think that was yeah a really good kind of take home point from there. I think and from other coaches that I work with and help in their development, programming exercises, coaching cues can be taught, and that knowledge is always going to be there. Whereas where what separates maybe good from great coaches or results is being able to tap into, how do you get the best out of that person in front of you? And it can be challenging. I've worked hard to learn and pick up things as much as I can to develop that. But no, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on, Tony. Really, really enjoyed chatting with you today. If anyone has got any questions about what we've spoken about today, or see the content or information that you put out there, where could people reach you or find you, Tony?
Yeah, so if you have any questions, you can just email me. My email is tony.montgomery@okstate.edu. And then for keeping up with things that I'm working on, I'm starting to launch a podcast as well. So that'll be up on social media. Just my name, Tony Montgomery Jr. I have YouTube videos of previous podcasts that I've done. Me and Paul did a lot of podcasts together, and so I have some really good interviews on YouTube with a bunch of good strength athletes. But moving forward, a lot of my interviews and podcasts are going to be on understanding human beings, human nature, and what makes us tick more. So if that's interesting to you, then that would be the best place to find me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Tony, for taking the time to jump on. Really, really enjoyed chatting with you today. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I'll see you all next week.